Madeline List, and I'm currently an industry analyst for the travel, tourism, and hospitality spaces. I attended Brandeis University. I graduated in 2015 with degrees in business and politics. I did my circumnavigation study in the summer of 2014, and I was studying cost-effective or sustainable methods of improving lives for people with physical disabilities. I was sponsored by the Boston chapter of the Circumnavigators Club. On my circumnavigation, I visited Brazil, Argentina, Australia, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Africa, Israel, Spain, and Sweden. The harbor at Rio de Janeiro was one of the first sites that I saw when I left the United States on circumnavigation, and it was also my first of the 7 natural wonders of the world that I was able to see, and I was just absolutely awestruck and taken aback. The natural formations from up there are beautiful, and the sea is glistening, and you see the city from so high up. And it just started the circumnavigation off on such a beautiful high note that not only was I able to be on the road and be traveling, but that I got to start out somewhere so beautiful, and that I got to check off something that I had on a poster on my wall since I was in high school and staring at. And it was a beautiful first step to be able to see something that I had dreamed about for so long. Iguazu is the second largest set of waterfalls in the world, and they're on the border between Brazil and Argentina. I took a tourist day during the circumnavigation to fly from Buenos Aires to the northern border of Argentina to see Iguazu. And it's just one of those places that takes your breath away, where you can stare at it and stare at it, and you don't understand how you're looking at something so big and so powerful. And we spent the whole day hiking into different places around the falls and going on boats to the river and seeing it from different angles. But it was a really beautiful and humbling experience to be able to visit there. Kuala Lumpur was one of the lower points of the circumnavigation for me personally. It was a place where I felt kind of more alone and shut in and more cut off from the culture than I had in a lot of other places, and a little less safe. It's expected within travels that you're going to have high points and low points. But I remember that on my last day in Kuala Lumpur, I was very ready to leave. I was about to have a birthday, and so I was trying to have a birthday on a high note, even though it had been a hard part of the trip. And when I was running to a store to pick something up before going to the airport, there was an absolute monsoon-like storm that just started raining upon me. I can't remember the last time I had been so absolutely drenched in my entire life. The streets were flooded. It was so wet. I had to get to the airport later. And I remember feeling at the level of just being done with that chapter and ready to leave, that I thought to myself, okay, this is a shower where it just washed off this part of the bad experience. I'm going back to the hotel, I'm changing, I'm drying off, I'm hopping on a plane and getting myself to South Africa. And there are some chapters of it where if it's not the high point, you just have to wash it off and you have to leave it behind, because that for me was not my favorite chapter of this trip. I loved going on safari in a game park near Cape Town in South Africa. One of the really unique things about that safari was, because it was a private park and private acreage, was that they have very large enclosures for certain animals, just so that they don't have predators encroaching on other animals' territories too much, to the extent that it does something harmful to the environment. And on the day that we were in safari, it happened to be that the pride of lions were very close to the electric fence. So we were actually able to get out of the Jeep and stand on foot, maybe 5 feet away, 10 feet away from this pride of lions. And while it was kind of a primal, existential cave woman-like fear that it strikes in you, it's also incredibly awe-striking to be sitting with nature in that type of way. And it drills some respect into you, but it was also very beautiful and very impactful to be able to experience nature in that way. lot of the parts of the nonprofit world was that people were so open and so sharing with their time, and also so pleased that somebody was willing to come from another country in order to learn about their jobs and to learn about their organizations. So with some of the people who I visited, it was more than just showing up to their office and having a brief chat. We went on tours, we would go to lunch, we would go to coffee, we would see local spots, we would see facilities. I saw wheelchair warehouses and training facilities for Paralympic athletes and all sorts of things that people really had to go out of their way to make a part of my experience. And so I have so much appreciation for the fact that they didn't just sit down in their office and talk to me about things briefly. They took me around their communities. They took me around many different parts of their organization. They made such a holistic effort to help me understand and help me to do my research better. One of the things my particular circumnavigation taught me was really about just this primal human desire to thrive through really bad circumstances. Because I was working with people with physical disabilities, I met people who just had circumstances that sucked, frankly. There isn't a nicer, more literary way I would even want to say it. People who had polio, people who were military veterans, people who had gone through accidents, people who just had bad, like, genetic luck in terms of being born with certain conditions. And the desire to go out and figure out how to live your life in a fulfilling way where you can thrive is so powerful across every country that you're in, across every culture that you're in. Some people face more barriers than others, no doubt, and there's progress that absolutely needs to happen. But that drive to just be better in any given day was really a really impactful lesson about the way humanity works for me. So one thing that the circumnavigation helped me understand better about myself is how much the wanderlust and the passion for travel are not fleeting phases, and it wasn't a temporary piece of my life or a piece of my youth that I could just shake out. For me and a lot of the people who are like me within the organization, travel and exploration are a way of life, and it's something that feeds you and makes you feel passionate all the time, and not something that is going to pass or something that you do and then kind of quit. It all needs to be a lifelong priority if you experience wanderlust, because you're never going to be done. There's always either going to be somewhere new to see, or there's going to be a new way to see it, or there's going to be a new person you can explore it with, or a new lens with which you can look at a place. Nobody who feels that strong sense of wanderlust is trying to check off every single thing that can be done. But I think every additional experience that you're able to have can really enhance your life and your understanding of the world in a brand new way. So it's important to go out there and to pursue each individual travel experience that you have the opportunity to have. A lot of naysayers for the fact that I was traveling as a young female around the world, and especially the fact that I was traveling to countries that some people felt uncomfortable about hearing about, or some people knew that I would stand out or be conspicuous in my appearance or my clothing. My suggestion is, first of all, that free advice is worth the price you pay when it comes to people giving you warnings about safety. If someone's not an expert in a place, and if someone's not an expert in a country, then don't be taking any sort of fear-mongering advice from them. And then the second piece of advice is to do your research incredibly conscientiously, and do take care of your safety, and to make sure that when you go somewhere, you have a sense of humility about your safety, and that you are taking precautions to really look as local as you possibly can, look as confident as you possibly can, listen to what locals are telling you about advice about the area, but don't not go just because somebody tries to ever scare you off of a place, especially for being a solo woman. Do your own research, be careful, be a really zealous advocate for your own safety and your own health and your own well-being. I do feel incredibly fortunate to be living in a country and to be living in a city where I'm able to have a high degree of safety walking by myself, or walking at night, or walking with my items that might look expensive. This isn't universal and you can't take it for granted. People don't always live under those conditions, and it's a massive deal that I'm able to have access to living in destinations like that. And then at the same time, I learned that there really is quite a lot to be experienced in other places, but you do have to be willing to put some of those privileges that you have on hold. There are places where you go where you have to be inside by sunset, and that's the reality, or you can't carry certain technology or wear certain jewelry outside or be alone or unescorted, and that's a reality. And it's okay to do an adapted version of those types of trips in order to take care of yourself or in order to make sure you're safe. It doesn't mean that it's not worth going, but you do have to look into what the conditions are in any given place, listen to local advice, listen to the internet advice when it comes from a sound resource, and take care of yourself, but have good experiences in the process. Part of what my circumnavigation helped me understand about my research topic is that there's a huge need within the disability studies space for more connectivity and more communication within the field. It's a field where they're facing massive barriers, systemic barriers, and a lot of the people who are providing services and trying to help people are really pressed for time and not always able to wake up one day if you're living in Brazil and ask yourself what somebody is doing in South Africa to help make people's lives better in your fields. But there really is a massive need for more facilitation of communication and more people helping connect people with problems, people who have found solutions in the past or are currently working on really creative ways of fixing problems. So while this is a field that has a long way to go, and there are a lot of inroads that can and should be made to help people's lives within the fields of service providers and nonprofit and government organizations that work with people with disabilities. More connectivity and understanding how other people have solved problems and implemented really consistent solutions to issues they face is very much needed in the field. The application process helped teach me that whenever there's something I need academically or even professionally, how important it is to always show how it's going to enhance a broader mission or a broader picture. A lot of grant writing was really focused and being very specific about how what you're doing is going to enrich the general understanding of what's happening in the world. I think that it was not my instinct at the very beginning of the process to always be connecting it back. And it taught me how to really always be reminding people the impacts that the research can have. In the following academic year after my circumnavigation, I took a lighter course load, both to decompress a little from all the things that had been on my mind after the circumnavigation, and also to put the thesis together and synthesize the notes and take writing time. And then I was able to turn that in a few months afterwards. And then on a more professional level with understanding myself, one of the lessons that was really important to me was the fact that you don't always have to go into something as an expert or as somebody who feels super qualified in order to be very successful eventually within your fields. There are so many people who can be successful by having an opportunity and by having grit and commitment to doing things in a smart way and showing up and learning and continuing to show up over and over again. There was a lot of success that I achieved within this project and later within my career, not by being the most knowledgeable person from day one, but by committing to learning more and by committing to being really disciplined about the way I worked towards being more expert in issues that I've had to face. But the circumnavigation really emboldened me to do things alone and to do things independently. I think both the travel and the research component were things that I would have looked for a lot more hand-holding for and a lot more direct help for if the conditions of the grant hadn't been that I do it by myself and really try to trailblaze within my study and within the travel. But then after I knew I could do it, I took the confidence and I knew I could do other things too. I continued to travel alone, and I definitely became a bolder researcher in my career as well, always feeling the need to find a lot of connections between data points and try to help people understand a really rich contextual picture of the things that I'm studying and feel a lot of confidence that I have the capability as a person to pull something like that off. One of the things that I learned from my mistakes on the circumnavigation are, even with language barriers, to try and put yourself out there and to test how much you can communicate based on the parts of the language or things you're able to write from motion. I think my most embarrassing direction situation on the circumnavigation was in Buenos Aires, when it was the time before it was common to have SIM cards where you could have Google Translate on your phone all the time. So I was running late to an interview and I knew the general area that I had to go to, but I walked 10 minutes out of my way to get to where I knew there was Wi-Fi when I was already running late to look up the Spanish word for intersection. And it turns out it's intersección. So in retrospect, I wish I had just pushed myself to think about it a little more creatively and to put myself out there a little more with pushing the language barriers, because I could have saved myself some time and the inevitable embarrassment that came when I realized how much easier it could have been for myself. I think that while traveling alone as a female made me more appreciative of the privileges that I have and being able to live in a really safe spot and to be able to live in a spot where I blend in and I look like lots of other women walking around in New York City, it also made me less afraid to stand out if I need to. There are some places where you're going to go and you'll just be immediately noticed for having a different race, for different clothing, for being a woman outside in a place where maybe there aren't a ton of other women alone outside with you. And I learned that you don't necessarily need to look like everybody else in order to go out and have a certain experience. You can stand out, you can be a little bit of an outcast or an outlier, and it can still be very worthwhile. Yeah, and it, you just have to live with it at a certain point. I grew up in places where there were lots of white people, and then they put you in Asia or they put you in sub-Saharan Africa, and you're just like a sore thumb. And that's just the reality. You either accept the fact that you stick out like a sore thumb and you own it and you accept the attention for whatever it is, and you talk with people and you try to respect them as much as possible, or you can cower. Traveling on the circumnavigation in places where I stood out for my appearance and my identity really allowed me to relate to people who do that here. Even though it was temporary for me and for other people, it's constant to live somewhere where you look differently or where you dress differently. It helped me to understand what it's like to be conspicuous and what it's like to be different. And I take that very seriously now when people worry about standing out or feeling very different in public spaces for their race or ethnic identity or clothing or anything like that. And I'm really grateful that I was able to have those experiences, because it's something that people often take lightly if you haven't gone through it personally. And once you go through it personally, you really start to understand how challenging it is, and it allows you to have a lot more empathy for people who are going through that on an everyday basis. Yeah, that's how it works. You think you're so great because you're one more young, upper middle class white woman walking down the street. You can always be put in somewhere where you're the person who's super conspicuous and where you're the one who people are staring at, not always positively. It's super relative, and people need to understand that. It would probably make them a little nicer in their day-to-day lives. The first piece of advice that I have for anybody doing this circumnavigation is that you have to go on the road on day one with the understanding that as much as you want to, you can't stay on the road forever. And if you're doing a circumnavigation, you're probably the type of person who's really fueled by being out there and traveling and getting inspiration from exploring. But you have to think not just about what you're able to enjoy on the road and the things that are going to bring you fulfillment on the road. You have to really actively think about the way that you want your travels to impact you when you come back home and when you need to process things, because that's what's going to help you to process that switch from the high of traveling to that sensation of the low from when you stop. You have to think about the way you want it to change you as a person and the way you want it to make you better as a person. And then the other piece of advice that I definitely learned from this trip is that you need to lean into the fact that it's such a unique way of traveling and a unique style of traveling. There were some types of tourist destinations or tourist experiences that, frankly, I didn't get to have in some of these places because I had a lot of academic stops on my schedule and I had a lot of demands on the schedule that were related to the research needs and the fact that I was doing a study. But the experiences that the academic components of the trip brought me were so unique and so special that even though I didn't get some of those tourist experiences, I was so grateful for it. So my advice is that even when you feel like you're missing something or like you feel like you're different from other travelers, or even if you feel isolated from constantly having to bounce between these places that are so different, in such broad parts of the world and maybe so far from people you know, embrace how unique it is, embrace how special the experience is, because you can always go back somewhere and be a traveler later. You can go back and be a pure tourist later. You probably won't be able to do a research study of this breadth and caliber at any other point. So you need to lean into how incredible those experiences and opportunities are on the circumnavigation. I'm not going to lie to you. As soon as I saw the initial email come out that described what it was, I was desperate to figure out a way that they could send me. And for me, the inspiration came a little later from other organic things that were happening in my life at the time. But I would say that getting research grants in academia is hard enough, and getting travel research grants is even harder, and getting a multi-destination travel research grant is something that you cannot pass up. If you have the opportunity to do this, you absolutely need to embrace the fact that this opportunity does not come along every day. And also embrace the opportunity that if you get a circumnavigation grant, it means that somebody believes in you and believes in your ability to execute something that's a really large-scale project. So it gives you this incredible platform to take something that you're passionate about and that you're passionate about studying and really examine it on a global scale in a way that other sponsors or other programs in your university probably would not allow you to. And if you do get offered the grant, then absolutely take it. I'm mostly just very excited that this program has been going for so long, and that the club has believed in it and believed in young college students for long enough to keep this going. When you're at the age where they give these grants, there are people around you who really empower you, and there are others who don't necessarily believe in young people as much, and not everyone necessarily believes in what they're capable of. And especially in retrospect, and as I've become a little more seasoned as a professional, I'm really impressed with how the Circumnavigators Club Foundation just trusts young people and trusts what they're capable of achieving. And I'm glad that they've kept that going for so long.